In 5.5, we're learning about percents, and the key question I'd like you to keep in mind is, what is the connection between ratios, fractions, and percents? The first key idea here is that a percent is a part to whole ratio where the whole is always out of 100. We know percents are always out of 100. So when we talk about a part to whole, that whole number ratio of the ratio will always be 100. And you can write a percent as a fraction with a denominator of 100. And it would look something like this. If I was talking about 60%, it's really the same thing as 60 out of 100, which would look like this: 60 over 100, 60 being the part, per whole. For example 1, we're going to be writing percents as fractions, and the first one we're going to do here is asking us to write 35% as a fraction in simplest form, and we're going to use a hundredths chart just to get us started on this. You're not always going to, but I'm giving you some hundredths charts that you can use for your notes this time. And so the first thing I want you to do is to just make sure you remember what 35% is, and it means 35 out of 100. Remember that part to whole ratio. So every box in here is 1/100th, so each row is 10. So we've got 10, 20, 30, and I don't really care how neatly you necessarily fill those in, as long as you can understand that that's 3 rows and then 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of another row. So that's 35 altogether out of 100. So what we're really talking about here is taking that percent and turning it into a fraction of 35 hundredths, or 35 out of 100, and then remember we do have to put it into simplest form here, and so we're going to find something they can both be divided by, and I know they can both be divided by 5, and if we do that, then 35 divided by 5 is 7, 100 divided by 5 is 20, so the final answer would be that 35% is equal to 7/20ths. Letter B says write 100% as a fraction in simplest form, and this shouldn't be too bad, but you just want to make sure you're understanding that simplest form part. So again, just to make sure you're clear, this is 100%, so 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100. And again, you can color it or you can just kind of shade them in, and then we are talking about trying to turn that into a fraction, and we always know that 100% usually means the full amount, so it's talking about 100 hundredths, and then when we do turn that into simplest form, you can think about how they're, divided by each other, or you can just remember that, the number on top, if the numerator is exactly the same as the denominator, then it's equal to 1 whole. So 100% is equal to 1 whole, or 1. And for letter C, we're going to be writing 174% as a mixed number in simplest form again. And this one, of course, you'll see, I want you to start looking at your percents and noticing. So 174% is over 100%. And so that means we're talking about 1 whole of these being filled in, because 1 whole of those grids would be 100. And so you can just kind of shade that one. And then we've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 more filled in. So this time 174% is equal to 174 100ths of those small squares, and we still have to do that in simplest form. So the first thing we're going to want to do here is to turn that improper fraction, because 174 is greater than 100, so we're going to turn that into a mixed number. So I know I can get one whole group of hundreds with 74 left over out of 100, and then I can see that 74 and 100 can both still be divided. So I can divide those by 2 if I want to, and I still keep that 1 the same, but 74 divided by 2, go ahead and do the side math if you need to, but it's 37, and 100 divided by 2, of course, is 50. So that means that 174% is actually equal to 1 and 37/50ths. Option 1, if the denominator is a factor of 100, then you can make an equivalent fraction that has a denominator of 100, and then finally you would write that numerator with a percent symbol. So for example 2a, it asks us to write 3/50ths as a percent, and so we know that 50 is a factor of 100. It can go into 100 evenly, so then we're going to write an equivalent fraction, and we're going to make 100 that denominator of that equivalent fraction, and we know that we can multiply 50 by 2 to get to 100, so then whatever we do to one part of a fraction, we know we have to do to the other. So if we multiply that 3 by 2, then we get 6, and then the final step here says to write that numerator with a percent symbol, and remember numerator's on top, so that means this would become 6%. Luckily, this is the easiest one of the two if you need to turn a fraction into a percent. So if it has a denominator that will go into 100 evenly, this is the way to go. Option 2 is going to seem a little trickier, but this one actually gets used more often because not all fractions do go into 100 evenly. So if the fraction has a denominator that will not go evenly into 100, then you divide the numerator by the denominator and multiply that final quotient by 100, and this is the big trick that's going to save you a lot of time. When you're multiplying a number by 100, especially if it has a decimal, you remember you can just move that decimal 2 places to the right, and then when you're all done and you're ready to give your final percent answer, you'll just put your percent symbol on that final answer. You could end up getting some long decimals when you do it this way, and you might have to round it, so just watch for directions when you're doing this type of problem. If it doesn't tell you to round it, then don't, but if it does say something like round to the nearest tenths or hundredths or whole number, then you know how to use your rounding skills for that. For example 2b, we're going to write 7/8 as a percent, and we can see that 8 doesn't go into 100 evenly, so we're going to need to use that option 2. When we set that up, we remember that the dividend always goes under the box, and that's always on top, and the divisor always goes outside, and it's always on the bottom. And when we go to do this, we'll recognize right away that 8 can't go into 7 evenly, but we know we can stick a decimal in here, and then once we put that there, we can go straight up with that. And then we can also put a 0 after that decimal in the dividend, and we can keep on going. So 8 can go into 70 about 8 times, and then when we go through and do our multiplication, 8 times 7 is 64. Do the subtraction, and you get a 6 right here. And we don't have to put another decimal, but we will have to add a 0 or annex a 0 and drop that. And then 8 goes into 67 times. 7 times 8 is 56. We do our subtraction and end up with 4, and we annex another 0 and drop that, and 8 goes into 40 5 times, and 5 times 8 is 40. And when you subtract, there's nothing left. So the final step, it said, was to take that decimal, and what we ended up with was 875 thousandths, and it said to move it 2 places to the right because that was multiplying by 100. And so when we do that, it will become 87.5, and then it said to just go ahead and put your percent symbol on there. And so yes, percents can come with decimals here, and I picked this one because I knew it wasn't going to go for too long, but I didn't have you round or anything like that to show that to you. If the decimal looked like it went out past the thousandths place and it were to just keep on going, I would say stop it right there and either check your math and make sure you didn't make a mistake that caused it to keep going, or check the directions for rounding, because a lot of times I'm not going to want you going much past that thousandths place in the work that we do this year. For this last on your own, I'm going to just help finish it off. So remember, this is option 2 because 3 does not go into 100 evenly. So that means we had to divide the numerator by the denominator. So we set up the division, used the decimal, put the zeros out there, And remember that the final step is to multiply by 100, so we're going to at least have to move our decimal over 2 spots. So notice I went out a little farther than just the 10th spot like the directions said, because when I go to actually move that decimal or multiply by 100, I'm going 2 spots from where it's at right now, which means that that decimal of 0.333 is going to get moved over here times 100, because that's what we do with turning it into a percent, and then it's going to become 33.3%. And I did ask you to round it to the nearest hundredth, but if you can see the pattern that's already going on here, you would put another zero that you would have dropped, and then 3 would have gone into 10 3 more times. So the 3's would keep on repeating, and so once you know that, you can still use it to round correctly, and since 3 is less than 5 anyway, we would have kept it the same, and that's probably the trickiest of all of these on your own. So those will take more practice, but for the most part, you should be getting the hang of the option 1 pretty well, and option 2 we'll just keep working at.